So I want to talk about this Tyre Nichols case that came out recently, really tragic story from Memphis, and more information is coming out about it every day. But I want to focus particularly on the whole white supremacy, racism angle that the media is determined to push, not just here in the US, but also in the UK. And I believe the media have been trying to set the tone from day one when this case first emerged by claiming that there were going to be riots and protesting, at least in Memphis and then potentially the rest of the country, telling us to brace ourselves. And in my opinion, I believe they're disappointed that that was not the case, because this is 5 black police officers who brutally beat to death another black man. It's not the narrative that they were hoping for. And they seem determined to make this into a race issue when no white people were involved in this brutal attack. I mean, even the chief of police in Memphis is a black woman, yet they're determined to somehow shift it towards an issue of white versus black or white supremacy. And no matter how ridiculous it sounds, they're doing the rounds, making sure that they're getting this out there. And I hope people aren't falling for it, but of course there always are going to be people who do fall for it. It reminds me of how they fail to acknowledge black on black crime, ever. Unless it's a white person involved, they don't care. BLM doesn't show up to cases of black men killing other black men. They don't show up to that. They only care about when a white police officer is involved. And in this case, no white police officers were involved, but even with this, they're trying to spin it and make it into a white versus black issue or white supremacy issue. And we know they don't care about black on black crime. And this is a classic case of deflection. And we know that nothing is going to be resolved with this matter. So I'm going to react to a couple of clips. And what gets me is that this is in the UK. They're determined to drag the UK into this when it didn't happen in the UK. And they've got their race crusaders trying to make sure that this message is drummed into people, that 5 black police officers brutally killing another black man is somehow white supremacy. And no matter how crazy it sounds, no matter how ridiculous the mental gymnastics appears to be, they're sticking by their story. So let's take a look.
Well, joining me now, Black Lives Matter organiser and activist Imarn Ayton and rapper and podcaster Zuby. Welcome to both of you. Imarn, I don't get this narrative at all that is coming out. It's been coming here from people as well, that somehow this is all about racism and white supremacy. It's not. It's about 5 poorly trained, thuggish black police officers killing a black man who did nothing to deserve it. That's it.
Okay, so I just have to start with saying that video was absolutely disgusting. One of the worst videos I've ever seen in my entire life.
And it goes on and on and on.
Yeah, it was disgusting. There was 2 versions of it: the body footage, and of course the pole from across the road. Absolutely disgusting. So I'm absolutely horrified at the fact that, of course, it was 5 black people. But for me personally, this is about an abuse of power and a disregard of human life, and those individuals need to be accountable for their actions. That I need to
Don't disagree.
Wow, so I totally agree with what she said. And yes, these officers do need to be held accountable, and they are in the process of being held accountable. They've been fired, second-degree murder charges. It's not like they were put on paid leave and, everyone's going back and forth about whether they're guilty of anything or not. No, the process has begun. It's not going to change what happened, but they are being held accountable. What would there be protests for in terms of gaining justice when everything that should be put in place has been put in place?
What's it got to do with racism and white supremacy?
So
Why are white people responsible for this?
Okay, so people could also argue that this is due to internalized racism, which is a byproduct of societal or institutional racism, also referred to as white supremacy.
And now here we go with the terminology such as internalized racism. Now, again, whatever terminology you want to use, it doesn't involve white people in this case. So I'm still at a loss as to how you can flip it and somehow make this about white supremacy. Again, they like to throw about this different types of terminology to justify their rational thought process.
So black police officers become white supremacist racists who kill black people because they work in an atmosphere of white supremacy. Is that it?
I can explain it a little bit better. Okay, so anti-blackness is baked into society here and in the US, and black people are not impervious to that. And so what people fail to realise...
So black people are anti-black?
Yep, this exactly. So let me explain it. I know it's very confusing. Nonsense. So let me explain it, Piers. So what people fail to realise is that when black people have to contend with racism, they can end up internalising it. And that can result in low self-esteem, self-loathing, and rejection of one's community. And when you combine those feelings, which, as we know, are also referred to as unconscious bias, when you have those feelings and they are compounded by hierarchy and power, it can lead to an individual abusing said power and projecting their self-hate onto another. And this is why, in my opinion, why we see black and white police officers killing more black people than we do white. Reason why is because of racism, which includes internalised racism here.
She may as well be saying that white people control us. The more you push this narrative, the more you're basically asserting that, whether you want to admit it or not. You're saying that we're not accountable for our own behaviour, we're not accountable for how we treat one another because of white supremacy. White people control black people. How does that make us look as a people? In the UK or in the US? And I don't see how they can justify this in all good conscience. And which one is it? Is it internalised racism causing the issues within the police? Are there many cases of black police officers harming and even killing other black people? Are there many cases of that? I don't doubt that self-loathing and, internalised racism exists that may cause you to perpetuate prejudice towards people of your own race. I've seen instances of that. Black conservatives have to deal with a lot of hate coming from people of their own race, for example. Or you're accused of being that, of being self-hating, just because you have a different political view, just because you may lean more towards the right. It wouldn't surprise me if they compared those 5 police officers, those 5 monsters, to people who have different political views, to black people who don't vote Democrat.
Right. I think that's complete nonsense.
You would, because you're a white man and you don't understand.
Exactly. I'm white, therefore my skin colour means I have...
Because you don't have the lived experience.
My skin colour means I have nothing to do with it. All right, well, let me go to a black man and see if he's allowed to have a view. Zuby, what's your view?
Okay, so I agree with the first half of everything that was said there. I agree that the video was disgusting. I agree that this is an issue of training, and I agree that this is an issue of the human heart. I think that any attempt to put the blame on this in any way, shape, or form on racism or white supremacy or white people in general is absolutely ridiculous. I also think it's pretty degrading because this sort of idea stems from the notion that black people, black men, black women, that we do not have full agency and responsibility and therefore accountability for our actions and our words. We end up in these ridiculous situations where no matter the permutation, no matter what happens, even if there's not a single white person involved in the situation, in the Memphis police force, even the police chief is a black woman. The large percentage of the force is black, and people are still trying to lean on this white supremacy is the answer and the reason for everything. And honestly, it's lame. And as someone who's lived my entire life as a black male, certainly I've never been possessed by this sort of phantom of white supremacy that's made me want to attack anybody, let alone another black person. And I think that we need to put the blame and responsibility squarely on the individuals who were involved in this.
That's what I've been trying to say. And it is degrading. And it demeans us when you speak about a whole race of people being controlled by another race of people. It's ridiculous. It's like they're asserting that black people can't get ahead unless the white man gives them a break. We don't have control over our own lives. We don't have control over our own destinies. It's all in the hands of the white man. This is what you're putting out there, whether you realize it or not, whether you want to admit it or not. This sort of thing is putting that message out there. It's like to the point where white people control whether we're kind to one another, whether we respect one another. It all stems back to, white supremacy that determines whether we can make a decision to be kind to our fellow people. I mean, this is the reason our inner cities haven't improved, because of all of this deflection. We're never going to get to the root of the problem if we carry on directing everything towards white supremacy. They don't acknowledge black on black crime. They don't acknowledge the fact that most black people, when they're walking down the street in Memphis at 1 a.m., their concern is not white police officers. Let's just be real. If they cared about improving our neighborhoods and getting rid of the crime in our neighborhoods, they wouldn't be deflecting like this. And on top of that, BLM doesn't even encourage people to be cooperative when they come across police officers. They want us to be irrational, to have this irrational fear every time we see a police officer. And I've said this before, the real issue that will not be addressed as long as we keep deflecting is the fact that mentally ill people, people on power trips, people who can't control their emotions, they're slipping through the net and being allowed onto the police force in these inner city areas where police are leaving with a mass exodus. They have to replace the officers to keep up with the level of, demand, the level of crime, pushing through these people, especially in the name of diversity. And where has that got us? Unfortunately, these things are going to continue to happen, and it's going to affect all of us, not just people of a particular race. As we've seen, it has affected people of all races. So let's take a look at this other clip. Again, it's in the UK where she's talking about gatekeepers or things of that nature. So let's take a look.
I've heard from his mum, Rowan Wells. She says that she hopes that his death will lead to change.
I would like that too, but there've just been too many from between George Floyd and today. Nothing has changed. And I very much doubt that anything will change until we eradicate the source of this problem, which is white supremacy.
Unfortunately, his death won't lead to change as long as we have people like this going on shows, doing their tour, and basically deflecting from the real issue. All this is going to do, unfortunately, is cause more tension between people of different races and tension between the police and, regular people. That's all this is going to do, as long as we have this sort of thing continue.
Listen, the vicious and brutal,
unjust... black that killed him.
And then this is why I'm about to educate some people right now. The vicious, brutal, unjustified extrajudicial killing of Tyre Nichols is as a result of a police system that is built on white supremacy. White supremacy underpins the policing and criminal justice system, both in the United States and the United Kingdom.
And here she goes, dragging the UK into it. The UK haven't dealt with institutionalised racism, that topic within the police, since the 90s. Doreen Lawrence, God bless her, worked tirelessly to expose the issues within the police force in the UK. We had the whole issue with stop and search. We've been through this, but she's trying to bring us back to the 90s. I'm not saying things are perfect today, but here she goes trying to basically bring us back and drag us back because of what's going on in the US. And it gives her a platform. People like this, it gives them a platform with their race-baiting careers. So they have a vested interest in keeping this sort of thing going. But, the UK has been there, done that. And yes, we can always monitor and make sure we learn lessons. But to just completely dismiss all the work that Doreen Lawrence has done and the progress that has been made because of what's going on in the US, that's not fair.
It shapes a culture that sees Black people as less, treats Black lives as disposable, and ensures that Black lives don't matter. Look, what I'm trying to explain here is that there is a systemic reality of white supremacy that produces racist white cops and racial gatekeeping Black and brown cops.
We have to be seen to value our lives before we go on about white supremacy, especially in this case where there are 5 police officers who are Black who killed another Black man.
Okay, this is the reality. And this is what Black people have to deal with. And this does not absolve in any way, shape, form, or manner the individual responsibility of the police officers. And I'm sure that there are good police officers listening right now that would say, no, listen, the point of the police is to protect and serve, and we try to do this. And I'll be like, look, I agree, the point of the police is to protect and serve. But the reality is that good police, they're the exception, not the norm.
The fact that she can go on TV and make that assertion without any evidence to say that they're the exception and not the norm. In reality, most people who have encounters with police don't end up being brutally murdered or being beaten to death. In reality, most people who have encounters with the police, if they're cooperative and they've done nothing wrong, they go about their business after a 5-minute exchange. But she's acting as if to say that they're the exception without any evidence, to go on TV and make that statement and make such a statement is pretty ridiculous. And what an insult to all the hardworking police officers out there, many of whom risk their lives every day, especially if you look at the US, like the inner cities, like Chicago, where many police officers have been taking their lives. It's a very stressful job and probably quite thankless. And you get people like this saying on a public platform, implying that they're a bunch of racists, to say that good police officers are the exception. In any profession, whether it's firefighters, teachers, EMT workers, there's good and bad. But the majority of them work hard at just doing their job. We don't say they're the exception when it comes to, good firefighters or good teachers, disparaging a whole group just because, of these incidents, as horrific as they are actually rare. But yet she's acting as if this happens every week. When in reality, what happens every week are shootings, in cities like Chicago, Memphis, St. Louis. This is the sort of thing that we're dealing with every week here in the US, where there's even mass shootings. There's mass shootings in inner city areas, South Side, Chicago, and that kind of thing. There was one weekend where 14 people were shot at a barbecue or something. 14 people, including 3 children. This is an issue that we're dealing with here, not police officers. And these police officers were black on top of that. And there's plenty of black police officers who work hard, have to do a hard, difficult job every day, risking their lives. Their families are concerned for their safety when they go out on the job. What about those people?
And the reality is what we see every day. Now, there'll be people also watching right now going, first of all, because they're black police officers, it means it's not racist. No, it means that you've not educated yourself on how systemically white supremacy works. Black and brown racial gatekeepers exist in policing, exist in our healthcare system, in our politics. They exist everywhere. And their point and their representation is to represent white supremacy, not people of their own race. Now, there'll be people argue right now going, oh, that's a left way of thinking. No, that's a humanity way of thinking.
And she's disparaging black police officers too. Basically, if we encounter a black police officer, they're gatekeepers of white supremacy. The nonsense that she asserts. She's not only demonizing white people, she's demonizing black people who are in positions of authority in the police force and politics or whatever else she was saying, and basically implying that black people are controlled by white people and that black people in certain professions are controlled by white supremacy. They're there to advance white supremacy. They say the same thing about black conservatives. Even the first potential black speaker of the House was called a white supremacist when he was up for nomination. When they were saying that he should be nominated, they were saying that the Republicans only nominating him because of white supremacy. Again, doesn't put us in a very good light, this sort of rhetoric that's being spread.
This is why activists like myself have always been very careful when we say representation matters, diversity matters, but you do not go and bring somebody whose whole representation is to represent exactly what is against us and say, that's your representation, Dr. Shola, that person's black. I'm like, no, that person's not my representation, because what they stand for is everything I stand against.
Well, if that's the case, why is she not holding these black 5 police officers accountable? She seems more angry at the concept of white supremacy than she does the actual perpetrators in this whole horrific incident. She seems more angry at white people than those black police officers who should be held to a higher standard. Clearly, they slipped through the net, but because they're black and they advance diversity, they were put through. And because there's so much crime there, they apparently had to rush people through to make sure that there's enough police officers on the street. And she's saying they don't represent her. Then hold them accountable then. Why are you making this about people who it has nothing to do with? Hold these 5 black men accountable. The outrage is misdirected. It really is. I'm not saying that we shouldn't be offended by the concept of white supremacy or whatever, but in this day and age, we're not oppressed. The white man is not oppressing us. We're free to do what we want in the UK and in the US as black people, believe it or not, contrary to what people like her say. But yet you're dismissing what's in front of you and going back as if we're living in the 60s or whatever, talking about white supremacy, deflecting from the real issue. So let me know what your thoughts are. Thanks for listening.